You lied to everyone." The words landed in front of me like a verdict. The studio audience fell silent. Across the podcast table, Ethan leaned back in his chair, fingers folded together, wearing the same expression I had seen 1,000 times before meetings, parties, and late-night conversations. Calm, certain, victorious. Beside him, Marcus shook his head slowly. Disappointed. Not angry. Disappointed. For some reason, that hurt more. A giant screen behind us displayed screenshots of messages. Edited screenshots. Selected screenshots. Carefully chosen screenshots. The crowd didn't know that. The thousands of people watching the live stream didn't know that either. They only knew what Ethan and Marcus wanted them to know. And right now, they wanted everyone to believe that I was a liar, a manipulator, a man who had betrayed the people closest to him. The host glanced between us nervously. "This is a serious accusation." "It is," Ethan replied. His voice remained steady, controlled, professional, exactly the way a person sounds when he has rehearsed every word beforehand. I didn't want it to come to this. The audience nodded. Of course they did. People always trust the person who appears reluctant. Marcus sighed heavily. We were his best friends. Were. Not are. Were. The choice of word wasn't accidental. We covered for him for years, Marcus continued. We protected him. Protected me. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I sat quietly. Because something felt wrong. Not the accusations. Those had started months ago. Not the public ambush. I had suspected something like this was coming. No. What felt wrong was Ethan. He kept glancing toward the producer station. Toward someone off camera. Like he was waiting for confirmation. Like he wasn't entirely sure where this was going. The realization settled heavily in my chest. This wasn't just a podcast episode. It was a trap. And for the first time all evening, I wondered whether Ethan and Marcus fully understood who had built it. The host cleared his throat. "Daniel, you've heard the accusations." I looked at him, then at my two oldest friends. Friends. The word felt strange now. What exactly am I supposed to respond to? I asked. A murmur spread through the room. People expected anger, denial, a dramatic outburst. Instead, I sounded tired. Because I was. Very tired. Ethan frowned. The truth. I met his gaze. The truth. Yes. I nodded slowly. Then I looked at the giant screen. At the messages. At the carefully edited narrative. At years of friendship being compressed into a handful of screenshots. And I felt something inside me break. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Quietly. Like a rope that had been stretched too far for too long. Because I suddenly understood something. I had spent years protecting people who would never do the same for me. The realization should have made me angry. Instead, it made me calm. And that frightened me. Because calm meant I was finished fighting. The host leaned forward. "Daniel?" I took a breath. Then I said the words that changed everything. "If that's the version you want to tell." I paused. Then tell all of it. For the first time that night, Ethan's expression changed. Only slightly. But enough. Enough for me to see uncertainty. Enough for me to know he wasn't as confident as he pretended. The audience didn't notice. I did, because I had known him for 12 years. 12 years. Long enough to recognize fear hiding behind confidence. Long enough to know exactly when someone regretted a decision. Long enough to know when a story was beginning to fall apart. The podcast was called Loyalty Test. 20 million subscribers. Millions more clips across social media. Its entire business model was simple. Expose betrayal. Reveal secrets. Create emotional explosions. The audience loved it. So did sponsors. 3 years earlier, Ethan had helped create it. Marcus had become a producer. I had helped build the company behind it. Nobody knew that. Because unlike them, I preferred staying behind the scenes. I handled contracts, investments, business negotiations, the boring work, the work nobody applauded, the work everyone forgot until something collapsed. When the show became successful, Ethan became the face. Marcus became the strategist. And I became invisible. At first, I didn't mind. Then people started rewriting history. Success has a strange effect on memory. The more successful someone becomes, the more people believe they succeeded alone. I watched it happen gradually. Interviews where my contributions disappeared. Stories that changed slightly each time they were retold. Moments where Ethan accepted credit for ideas that weren't his. Small things. Nothing worth fighting over. At least that was what I told myself. The first lie is always the easiest to forgive. The second feels similar. The third becomes normal. After that, people stop seeing it as lying. They start calling it reality. The host's voice pulled me back. Marcus claims you manipulated company finances. The audience reacted immediately. Financial misconduct. Powerful words. Dangerous words. Marcus nodded sadly. Again with the disappointment. Always disappointment. Never responsibility. We trusted him. I looked at him carefully. Did you? The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then Ethan stepped in. Don't change the subject. There it was. Another thing I recognized. Whenever Ethan interrupted someone, it meant he was worried. I folded my hands. I'm not changing the subject. The room felt smaller. Hotter. Every camera pointed toward me. Every audience member waiting. Every online viewer expecting a collapse. I thought about leaving. Walking away. Letting them have their moment. But another memory surfaced. A late night years ago. 3 friends sitting on a rooftop. Making promises. Laughing. Talking about success. About loyalty. About never becoming people we hated. Funny. How often betrayal begins with promises. The host looked uncomfortable. He sensed tension. Real tension. Not the manufactured kind television producers love. The dangerous kind. The kind nobody can fully control. Daniel, he said carefully, Marcus says company money was moved without authorization. I nodded. It was. The audience gasped. Ethan smiled. Marcus looked relieved. The host blinked. You admit it? Of course. Now everyone looked confused, including Ethan, because context matters. And context was the one thing they hadn't prepared for. Tell them where the money went. Marcus hesitated. I noticed. The audience didn't. Tell them. Silence. The host looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Ethan. Ethan looked toward the producer station again. Interesting. Very interesting. Finally, Marcus spoke. It was transferred. Where? Another pause. My suspicion deepened. Because if he genuinely believed his accusations, he would have answered immediately. Instead, he looked nervous. The audience began shifting. People sense uncertainty, even when they don't understand why. I leaned back, the same way Ethan had earlier. You don't know, do you? His face tightened. The answer was obvious. No, he didn't. Because someone else had given him information. Someone else had built this narrative. Someone else had convinced him he was exposing me. And suddenly I wasn't wondering whether Ethan and Marcus had betrayed me. I was wondering whether they had been manipulated too. That possibility should have made me sympathetic. It didn't, because regardless of who pushed them forward, they had still chosen to stand here. They had still chosen public humiliation over private conversation. They had still chosen trust in strangers over trust in a friend. The host checked something on his tablet. Then his expression changed. A producer whispered into his earpiece. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Not subtly. Abruptly. Like a train changing tracks. I felt it. Ethan felt it too. His confidence vanished. Just for a second. Then he forced it back. But it was too late. I had seen it. The host swallowed. There's additional information. No one spoke. The audience leaned forward. I felt my heartbeat slow. Because suddenly I knew. Something had happened backstage. Something unexpected. The host looked toward the control room. Then back at us. An audio file was submitted during the live stream. My stomach tightened. Audio file? Ethan frowned. Marcus looked confused. The host continued. The production team has verified the timestamp. Now Ethan looked worried. Genuinely worried. Not performatively worried. The difference was enormous. The giant screen behind us went dark. A technician changed feeds. The audience whispered. Nobody understood what was happening. Neither did I. Not yet. Then a file name appeared. A simple file name. Nothing dramatic. Nothing flashy. Just a date. 3 years old. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Because I recognized it. I knew exactly what it was. And so did Ethan. His face lost color immediately. Marcus turned toward him. What is it? Ethan didn't answer. The host looked uncomfortable. We've been advised to play the recording. The room became completely silent. I stared at the screen. At that date. At a forgotten night from 3 years ago. A night nobody had mentioned in a very long time. A night that should never have mattered again. Except apparently it did. Apparently it mattered enough to stop an entire podcast episode. Apparently it mattered enough to terrify Ethan. The recording icon appeared, ready to play. And for the first time since entering the studio, I realized the story being told tonight wasn't the one anyone expected, including me. The people who demand loyalty most loudly are often the first to treat it as something owed rather than earned. The audio file began to load, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet certainty settled into place. No matter what happened next, I would never return to the role they expected me to play. Not again. The recording didn't start immediately. For several seconds, the studio remained trapped in silence. A strange silence. Heavy, expectant, dangerous. The audience shifted in their seats. The livestream chat raced across monitors. Producers moved quickly behind the cameras. Nobody liked uncertainty, especially not people whose careers depended on controlling narratives. I watched Ethan. He wasn't looking at the screen. He wasn't looking at the audience. He wasn't even looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the floor. And that frightened me more than if he had started shouting. Because Ethan never looked away when he believed he was right. Never. The host cleared his throat. We verified the metadata. His voice sounded different now. Less confident. More cautious. As part of journalistic standards, we should make it clear that this recording appears authentic. Appears authentic. Interesting wording. Careful wording. The kind lawyers prefer. The audience barely noticed. But I did. Because for years I had sat through enough contract negotiations to recognize when people were protecting themselves. Marcus looked increasingly uncomfortable. What recording? Nobody answered him. The technician pressed play. A burst of static filled the studio. Then voices emerged. Old voices. Younger voices. 3 men sitting together after midnight. 3 friends. 3 people who still trusted each other. My chest tightened immediately. I remember that night. Not because it was important at the time. Because it wasn't. At least, it hadn't seemed important. Funny how life worked. Sometimes the moments that changed everything looked ordinary while they were happening. The recording continued. Marcus laughed. You know what worries me? The younger version of Ethan answered. What? If this thing succeeds? A pause. Then all 3 of us laughed. I remembered why. Back then, Loyalty Test was barely surviving. The first season had almost failed. Sponsors were uncertain. Investors were cautious. None of us knew what the future looked like. Marcus continued. If we become successful. Ethan laughed again. You mean when? More laughter. Then my own voice entered the recording. If that happens, remember this conversation. The audience listened carefully. So did I. My younger self sounded tired. Hopeful. A little naive. The kind of man who still believed promises mattered. The recording continued. Ethan asked why. And then came the sentence that changed the atmosphere inside the studio. Because success makes people rewrite history. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Even the audience seemed frozen. My younger voice continued. They start believing they did everything themselves. Silence. Then Marcus laughed. Not us. Another pause. Then Ethan. Never us. The recording ended abruptly. The studio remained silent. Nothing explosive had happened. No confession. No dramatic reveal. No smoking gun. Yet the atmosphere had changed completely. Because everyone had heard it. The irony. The uncomfortable irony. 3 friends discussing the exact thing that now stood between them. The audience wasn't stupid. People recognized hypocrisy when it stared directly at them. The host shifted in his chair. Ethan looked exhausted. Marcus appeared confused. Almost lost. The chat screens exploded. Comments rolled faster than producers could track. Questions. Theories. Doubts. The certainty that had dominated the episode only minutes earlier began cracking apart. And once certainty cracks, people become curious. Curiosity is dangerous. Because curious people start asking questions. The host looked at Ethan. Do you want to respond? Ethan finally lifted his head. His expression surprised me. I expected anger, defensiveness, excuses. Instead, he looked wounded, not by the recording, by something else, something deeper. He rubbed his face slowly and said something I never expected to hear. I didn't know that recording existed. The audience waited. So, the host leaned forward. So what does it mean? Ethan stared at the table. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, it means I should have talked to him first. The audience murmured. Marcus turned sharply. What? The statement clearly surprised him too. Ethan ignored him. Instead, he looked directly at me. The first genuine eye contact we'd made all evening. And for a brief moment, I saw the friend I used to know. Not the public figure. Not the influencer. Not the media personality. Just Ethan. Tired. Confused. Human. Then the moment disappeared. Marcus interrupted. Wait a second. His voice rose. No. He pointed toward me. We came here because there were real concerns. The old certainty returned. The old narrative. The old accusation. I watched him carefully, and something clicked. Marcus wasn't reacting like a man protecting truth. He was reacting like a man protecting a conclusion. There's a difference. Truth asks questions. Conclusions avoid them. The realization settled heavily in my mind. Someone had convinced Marcus long before tonight. Someone had spent weeks feeding him information. And Marcus had accepted it because it confirmed what he already wanted to believe. The host asked another question. The financial transfer. Marcus nodded immediately. There. Back to familiar ground. Back to accusations. The money still moved. I folded my hands. Correct. Without approval. Incorrect. His expression hardened. You're lying. Normally that accusation would have angered me. Tonight it didn't. Because I was beginning to understand something. People hear only what fits the story they've already chosen. Nothing I said tonight would change Marcus. Not immediately. Maybe not ever. The realization felt strangely freeing. For years, I had exhausted myself explaining, defending, clarifying, managing misunderstandings, protecting relationships, holding together fragile friendships. Suddenly, I didn't want it anymore. I was tired. Very tired. The host turned toward me. You have documentation? Yes. The answer came easily, because I always kept documentation. Years in business teach you that memories change. Records don't. The production team displayed a document on the screen. Board approval, electronic signatures, transfer authorization, multiple approvals. Perfectly legal, perfectly documented. Marcus stared at it, then frowned. His confusion looked genuine. And that was the moment I became certain. He had never seen the complete information. Not once. Someone had intentionally kept him ignorant. The question was why. The host looked stunned. This was approved. Yes. The audience buzzed again. Marcus looked at Ethan. But Ethan didn't answer, because he was staring toward the producer station again, toward the same place he'd been watching all night. I followed his gaze. A woman stood there. Professional clothes. Tablet in hand. Expression unreadable. Lena Foster. Executive producer. Co-founder. Public relations expert. Narrative architect. And perhaps the most dangerous person in the building. Our eyes met briefly. She smiled. A small smile. Almost polite. Then she looked away. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Because suddenly I understood. The trap had never belonged to Ethan. Or Marcus. It belonged to Lena. And that changed everything. The episode ended early. Officially because producers wanted to verify additional information. Unofficially because the story had escaped their control. The audience left reluctantly. Cameras shut down. Staff moved quickly through the studio. The moment live stream pressure disappeared, reality rushed back into the room. People stopped performing. That was when truth became easier to see. Marcus approached me first. His face was pale. What the hell is happening? I studied him. For years I would have answered immediately, explained everything, helped him, protected him. Tonight I didn't. Instead I asked a question. What information did Lena give you? He blinked. What? What information? His confusion deepened. I don't understand. And once again I believed him. Not completely, but enough. Enough to know he wasn't the architect. Only a participant. A useful participant. Marcus rubbed his forehead. She showed us documents. What documents? He hesitated. Then realization slowly crossed his face. The horrifying realization that perhaps he should have asked that question weeks ago. I watched the moment happen. The moment certainty becomes doubt. The moment confidence becomes fear. It's not dramatic. It's quiet, like ice beginning to crack beneath someone's feet. Ethan approached next. Unlike Marcus, he already looked defeated. "We need to talk." The old version of me would have agreed immediately. Not because I wanted to, because I felt responsible. Responsible for fixing things. Responsible for keeping everyone together. Responsible for cleaning up damage. Tonight, I felt none of that. The absence shocked me. Ethan noticed. His expression tightened. "Daniel." I looked at him, waiting. Nothing more. The silence forced him to continue. "I'm sorry." Marcus stared. Apparently, this was unexpected. Honestly, it was unexpected for me too. Ethan swallowed. "We should have spoken privately." Yes, we should have. The answer remained inside my head. I didn't say it aloud. Not because I forgave him. Because I no longer needed him to understand. That difference mattered. For years, I believed healing required recognition. An apology. Justice. Now I wasn't so sure. Sometimes healing begins when you stop demanding things other people aren't capable of giving. The thought surprised me. Maybe because it felt true. Marcus looked increasingly distressed. "Can someone explain what is happening?" Nobody answered immediately. The hallway around us felt strangely empty. Like everyone else sensed something ending. Not a business partnership. Not a podcast episode. Something older. Something deeper. A version of friendship. A version of trust. A version of ourselves. Lena appeared before anyone could speak further. Perfect timing. Of course. She smiled professionally. "There you are." Nobody returned the smile. Her eyes moved across the three of us. Calculating. Measuring. Evaluating. The way investors evaluate risk. The way chess players evaluate positions. The way predators evaluate weakness. And she focused on me. "Daniel, can we talk privately?" "No." The answer came instantly. Her smile flickered. Only slightly. But enough. Enough to reveal irritation beneath control. I noticed. So did Ethan. "Interesting. Very interesting." Lena adjusted smoothly. "This affects all of us." "No." I met her gaze. "It affects the people who created it." Silence. Marcus looked between us. Completely lost. Ethan looked increasingly uncomfortable. Because unlike Marcus, he understood exactly what I meant. For years, Ethan had underestimated Lena's influence. Not because he was stupid, because she was subtle. She never pushed openly. Never demanded. Never controlled visibly. She simply shaped conversations. Guided assumptions. Directed attention. And somehow people always arrived at conclusions she wanted, without realizing they had been led there. I had seen it years ago. Ignored it. Explained it away. Made excuses. Not anymore. Lena folded her arms. "You think I planned this? I think you benefited from it." The distinction mattered. Her eyes narrowed. For the first time all evening, she looked annoyed. Not dangerous. Not powerful. Just annoyed. And somehow that made her look far more human. The hallway became silent. Nobody moved. Then Lena laughed softly. "That's disappointing." I almost smiled. Because those were Marcus's words earlier. Disappointing. Interesting how certain phrases travel between people. Interesting how influence leaves fingerprints. The realization struck me immediately. Not proof. Not evidence. Just intuition. But strong intuition. Strong enough to make me step back. Strong enough to make a decision. For years, I had been the person who rushed forward whenever relationships broke. The mediator. The fixer. The bridge. Tonight, I walked away. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Simply walked away. Behind me, voices started rising. Questions. Accusations. Confusion. I didn't turn around. For the first time in years, I allowed other people to manage the consequences of their own choices. Every act of rescue teaches someone they never need to save themselves. As I stepped into the cold night air, my phone vibrated. A new message. Unknown number. One audio file attached. And beneath it, a single sentence. "You haven't heard the recording that matters." I stood beneath the glow of a street lamp, staring at the message. The city moved around me. Cars rolled through intersections. People laughed outside nearby restaurants. A delivery motorcycle sped past. Normal life. Ordinary life. Yet my attention remained fixed on a single sentence. You haven't heard the recording that matters. The sender was anonymous. No name. No profile photo. No explanation. Just an audio file. Nearly 4 minutes long. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then stopped. A strange instinct told me not to listen immediately. For years I had worked around negotiations, disputes, and corporate conflicts. One lesson always remained true. Information has timing. Sometimes the information itself matters less than when you receive it. Someone had waited until now. Someone had chosen this exact moment. That meant something. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Not because I wasn't curious. Because I was. Dangerously curious. And curiosity can make people careless. Tonight, I refused to be careless. For the first time in years, I decided not to react. My apartment felt unusually quiet. The silence wasn't lonely. It was unfamiliar. For years, my life had been filled with constant communication. Messages, meetings, emergency calls, friendship crises, business disputes. Someone always needed something. Someone always wanted advice. Someone always expected me to solve a problem. Tonight, nobody expected anything. The realization felt strange. I poured a glass of water and sat by the window. The city lights stretched across the skyline. Somewhere beyond them, the internet was still discussing the podcast. The clips would already be spreading. Millions of opinions forming from incomplete information. Millions of strangers deciding who was right and who was wrong. I should have cared. Instead, I felt tired. Not physically, emotionally. The exhaustion that comes from carrying responsibilities nobody asked you to carry. The exhaustion that comes from protecting people who gradually begin treating protection as an entitlement. My phone vibrated. Ethan, calling. I watched the screen, then declined. A minute later, he called again. Declined. Then a message appeared. We need to talk. I stared at it. For years, I would have responded immediately. Not because I wanted to, because I felt obligated. The difference mattered. Tonight, I simply locked the phone. No response. No explanation. No argument. Nothing. The silence felt uncomfortable, then surprisingly peaceful. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is nothing. The next morning, I listened to the recording. Not because curiosity won, because preparation did. I sat at my desk, closed the blinds, placed my phone on the table, then pressed play. For several seconds, nothing happened. Ambient noise, movement, a door closing, then voices. Immediately recognizable voices. Lena and Ethan. My entire body stiffened. The timestamp appeared in the corner. 6 months earlier. Long before the podcast episode. Long before public accusations. Long before everything exploded. I listened carefully. Lena's voice came first. Calm, measured, strategic. People trust conflict. A pause. Then Ethan. What does that mean? Lena laughed softly. It means audiences get bored. Another pause. The show needs a bigger story. I felt my pulse quicken. Ethan sounded confused. What story? Lena answered immediately. The founder conflict. Silence. Then, Daniel. My name. A simple word. Yet hearing it changed everything. I leaned closer. Lena continued. He has credibility. He stays invisible. And people won't expect it. The room suddenly felt colder. Ethan spoke again. What exactly are you suggesting? A pause. A long pause. Then Lena's voice. We don't need lies. That sentence would have sounded reassuring to anyone else. To me, it sounded dangerous. Because manipulators rarely begin with lies. They begin with selective truth. The recording continued. We only need a narrative. My grip tightened around the phone. Narrative. Not facts. Not evidence. Narrative. The distinction mattered. Ethan sounded increasingly uncomfortable. This feels wrong. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Lena said something that made my stomach turn. People don't remember facts. Another pause. They remember stories. The recording ended abruptly. I sat motionless. The room completely silent. 3 minutes and 48 seconds. That was all. No direct conspiracy. No explicit confession. Nothing illegal. Nothing dramatic. Yet somehow it felt worse. Because it revealed intent. Not action. Intent. The recording didn't prove Lena framed me. It proved she viewed people as stories. Assets. Pieces. Characters. Tools. And suddenly the last 6 months began making sense. The rumors. The subtle shifts. The growing distrust. The conversations that somehow always reached the same conclusions. The careful erosion of credibility. Not a direct attack. A gradual one. Slow. Patient. Strategic. The kind most people never notice until it's finished. I stared at the screen. Then asked the obvious question. Who sent this? By afternoon, the answer arrived unexpectedly. Not from technology. Not from investigation. From a knock on my door. I opened it to find a young woman standing in the hallway. Late 20s. Professional clothes. Nervous expression. A folder clutched tightly against her chest. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "My name is Claire." I waited. She swallowed. "I used to work for Lena." "Interesting. Very interesting." I stepped aside. "Come in." Claire sat across from me, visibly uncomfortable. Not fearful. Guilty. The difference mattered. People who are afraid want protection. People who feel guilty want forgiveness. She looked like someone searching for both. I poured tea. She thanked me quietly, then stared into the cup, gathering courage. Finally she spoke. "I sent the recording." I nodded. No surprise. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, as if confession itself had weight. "I should have sent it sooner." "Why didn't you?" The question hung between us. Claire looked away. "Because I thought she was right." Honest answer. Painfully honest. She took a breath, then continued. "At first." The words came slowly, carefully, like someone revisiting decisions they regretted. Lena always sounded reasonable. I wasn't surprised. Manipulation rarely arrives wearing a villain's face. It usually arrives sounding practical, logical, helpful. Claire continued. "She never told people what to think." A bitter smile appeared. "She just made certain thoughts seem obvious." I remember that smile. I had worn it myself once. The smile people wear when they finally understand how they were influenced. Claire opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, meeting summaries, internal memos, notes. Nothing explosive, nothing illegal. But together they formed a pattern, a disturbing pattern. Every conflict, every rumor, every narrative shift, every strategic leak, always leading toward the same outcome. More attention, more engagement, more audience growth, more influence. People became content. Friendships became content. Trust became content. Pain became content. And Lena became very successful. Claire watched me carefully. "You already knew something was wrong." It wasn't a question. I nodded. I just didn't know how much. She looked relieved, then sad. I should have stopped it. I understood the feeling, more than she realized. Because regret often sounds the same regardless of circumstance. The belief that if you had acted sooner, everything would be different. Sometimes that's true. Most times it isn't. I looked through the documents. Patterns emerged immediately. Not proof. Patterns. But patterns matter, especially when they repeat. The same names, the same strategies, the same outcomes. Again, and again, and again. Claire leaned forward. "She's preparing something." I looked up. "What?" Her expression darkened. The board meeting. A cold feeling settled into my chest. The company board. Of course. If the podcast attack failed, there would be another approach. There is always another approach, especially when influence and money are involved. "What board meeting?" Claire hesitated, then answered. "The one where they're planning to remove you." Silence. Absolute silence. I felt surprisingly calm. Not because the news didn't matter, because suddenly everything made sense. The podcast wasn't the destination. It was preparation, public pressure, reputation damage, narrative creation. The board meeting was the real objective, and someone had just revealed the entire strategy. That evening, my phone exploded with messages. Journalists, employees, former colleagues, strangers, supporters, critics. Everyone wanted something. A statement, a reaction, a response. I gave them nothing. No interviews, no posts, no emotional videos, nothing. The internet hates silence. Silence creates a vacuum, and vacuums attract speculation. Yet I remained silent anyway. Not because I had a clever strategy, because I was done performing, done explaining, done competing for public approval. The reaction was immediate. Without my participation, other people started talking. Employees began sharing experiences. Former staff described working environments. Anonymous accounts posted old screenshots. Questions spread, not accusations. Questions. And questions are often more dangerous than accusations. Because questions invite investigation. Investigation invites truth. For years, I had rushed forward to control damage. Now I simply watched. The consequences unfolded without me. And for the first time, I understood something important. I was never holding everything together. I was only delaying collapse. The realization felt both painful and liberating. Near midnight, Ethan finally appeared at my apartment. Not with cameras, not with producers. Alone. He looked exhausted, older somehow. The past 48 hours had stripped away years of confidence. I opened the door. Neither of us spoke immediately. Then he said, "You were right." I waited. He looked down. About history. The rooftop conversation. The old recording. The promise. Success makes people rewrite history. A bitter smile crossed my face. Not satisfaction. Sadness. Because neither of us had expected that prediction to come true. Ethan entered quietly. The conversation that followed lasted hours. Hard truths. Painful admissions. Questions neither of us wanted to ask. Answers neither of us wanted to hear. And near the end, Ethan revealed something unexpected. Something that changed everything. He looked directly at me, then said, "Marcus isn't the one you should be worried about." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated, long enough to make my pulse quicken. Then he spoke. "The financial accusations." His voice lowered. They didn't come from Lena. Silence. A dangerous silence. Because there was only one possibility left. Only one person with access. Only one person who could have supplied the information. Only one person both Ethan and I trusted completely. When Ethan finally said the name, I felt the ground disappear beneath me. David, my mentor, the man who taught me business, the man I considered family, the man who had stood beside me for nearly a decade, the last person I ever suspected. And suddenly I understood that the story was far bigger than I imagined. For several seconds after Ethan said the name, I couldn't respond. David. The word echoed in my head. Not because it sounded impossible, because it explained too much. The human mind has a strange habit. When something painful happens, we often ignore explanations that hurt the most. Not because they are wrong, because accepting them requires us to reevaluate years of trust, years of memories, years of certainty. I stared at Ethan. "You better be sure." My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Ethan nodded slowly. I wouldn't have said it otherwise. The room fell silent. Outside the window, city lights shimmered against the darkness. Inside, an entirely different kind of darkness settled between us. David wasn't merely a mentor. He was the person who had helped me build my career. The person who introduced me to investors. The person who taught me how negotiations worked. The person who once told me, "Never fear losing money. Fear losing your ability to judge people." The irony almost made me laugh. Instead, I felt tired. Very tired. Ethan watched me carefully. "You suspected him?" "No." The answer came immediately. Because it was true. Not once. Not even for a second. That realization hurt more than the accusation itself. The people who betray you rarely enter your life as enemies. They arrive as teachers, partners, friends, family. That's why betrayal works. The next morning, I met Claire again. This time at a quiet cafe, several blocks from downtown. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The morning crowd spoke in low voices. Nobody paid attention to us. Exactly the way I preferred. Claire slid a folder across the table. I found more. I opened it. Meeting records, investment summaries, internal correspondence. Nothing dramatic. At first. Then I noticed a pattern. The same investment group appeared repeatedly. Different projects, different proposals, different years. Same investors. I frowned. Claire watched my reaction. "You see it." Not a question. A statement. I nodded slowly. The investment group was connected to David. Indirectly. Carefully. Through layers of partnerships and holding companies. The structure wasn't illegal. Many businesses operated similarly. What mattered wasn't the existence of the relationship. It was the timing. Every major conflict inside the company somehow created opportunities benefiting those investors. The realization made my stomach tighten. Not proof, but once again a pattern. Patterns matter, especially when they keep repeating. Claire lowered her voice. The board meeting is tomorrow. Tomorrow. So the final move was approaching. The podcast had failed. Public pressure had weakened. Now they would attempt institutional pressure. Official pressure. Corporate pressure. More respectable. More dangerous. I closed the folder. For years my instinct would have been immediate action. Calls. Meetings. Emergency damage control. Instead I simply asked, how many board members know? Claire hesitated. About David? I nodded. None. Interesting. Very interesting. Because that meant one thing. David believed he would win before anyone started asking questions. Confidence can be useful. Overconfidence is often fatal. By noon, Marcus called. I considered ignoring him, then answered. The silence lasted several seconds. Finally he spoke. I was wrong. No excuses. No qualifications. No conditions. Just 4 words. Simple words. Yet somehow harder to say than 1,000 explanations. I leaned back in my chair. What changed? Marcus laughed bitterly. My pride. At least he was honest. That was new. He continued. I wanted to believe I was exposing something. His voice sounded exhausted. Turns out I was being used. Used. The word carried obvious pain. Nobody enjoys realizing they were someone else's tool. Especially not intelligent people. Because intelligence creates confidence. And confidence makes manipulation harder to recognize. Marcus exhaled slowly. I hurt you. Again, no excuses. Just truth. The conversation that followed surprised me. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. Trust doesn't magically return because someone apologizes. But for the first time in months, Marcus sounded genuine. Not defensive. Not certain. Not performing. Human. Flawed. Regretful. Human. Before ending the call, he said something important. David contacted me 3 months ago. I sat up. About what? The financial transfers. A cold feeling moved through me. Marcus continued. He said he was worried. Of course. Worried. Concern is one of the safest disguises manipulation can wear. Nobody questions concern. Nobody questions someone who claims they're trying to help. Marcus sighed. I should have checked. Maybe. Maybe not. People always imagine better decisions after seeing outcomes. Hindsight creates perfect judgment. Reality rarely does. When the call ended, I remained seated for a long time, thinking, connecting pieces, watching the picture become clearer. Not complete, clearer. And that was enough. The board meeting took place the following afternoon. The conference room occupied the top floor of the company's headquarters. Glass walls, city skyline, polished wood, controlled smiles. Corporate warfare always prefers elegant settings. David arrived early. Of course he did. He moved through the room confidently, greeting people, shaking hands, offering friendly conversation. The image of a trusted senior advisor. An image he had spent years building. An image few people questioned. I watched quietly from across the room. David noticed me, smiled warmly, walked over, exactly as expected. Daniel. His voice sounded familiar, comforting, almost paternal. The same voice that had guided me through countless challenges. For a brief moment, I understood why betrayal hurts so much. Not because trust disappears, because memories remain. David sat beside me. Rough week. I studied him carefully. The calm, the confidence, the certainty. Either he was innocent, or he believed nobody could prove otherwise. I wasn't sure which possibility concerned me more. Something like that. His smile remained. Professional. Controlled. Then he lowered his voice. These situations require patience. Interesting advice. Particularly from him. The meeting began before I could answer. Board members took their seats. Documents appeared. Presentation started. Everything looked normal. Until it didn't. The chairman cleared his throat. There are concerns regarding executive oversight. There was the official attack. Polite language. Sharp consequences. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Others avoided eye contact. Nobody enjoys these conversations, especially when outcomes seem predetermined. The chairman continued. Given recent public controversies, the podcast, exactly as planned. The board wasn't evaluating facts. It was evaluating risk, reputation, perception, narrative. The same game, different room. David remained silent, watching, waiting, patient. Then Claire entered. The room froze. Every head turned. Board meetings don't usually receive unexpected guests, especially not former employees. The chairman frowned. Miss Claire. She handed him a folder. No speech, no dramatic announcement, just a folder. Then she sat down. Silence spread through the room. The chairman opened it. His expression changed immediately, then changed again. Board members exchanged confused looks. The folder began moving around the table. One director read silently, then another, then another. The atmosphere shifted, slowly at first, then rapidly. Questions emerged. Confusion followed. Then concern. Real concern. Not performative concern. The dangerous kind. The chairman finally looked toward David. His expression was very different now. Would you like to explain this? For the first time all afternoon, David looked surprised. Only briefly, but briefly was enough. The room noticed. So did I. David accepted the folder. Read several pages. His face remained controlled. Years of experience showed. Yet something had changed. The certainty was gone. Board members began speaking, one after another. Questions, timelines, investment relationships, disclosure obligations, potential conflicts of interest. Nothing explosive individually. Together, devastating. Truth does not create damage. It reveals where damage already exists. The sentence surfaced quietly in my mind. Nobody was accusing David of crimes. Nobody was making dramatic claims. They were simply asking questions. Questions supported by documents. Questions supported by timelines. Questions supported by facts. Questions David could not easily dismiss. Because facts have a stubborn habit. They remain, even when narratives change. Then came the moment nobody expected. Not even me. A board member near the far end of the table spoke. I received something this morning. The room turned toward him. He activated the conference display. An audio file appeared. My heartbeat slowed. Another recording. The room became silent. The file began playing. David's voice filled the speakers. Calm, confident, private. A conversation recorded months earlier. Not with me. Not with Ethan. Not with Marcus. With an investor. The room listened. Every word landing heavier than the last. The discussion wasn't illegal. That wasn't the problem. The problem was intent. The problem was strategy. The problem was hearing David openly discuss how reputational pressure could create leadership changes, how narratives influence decisions, how timing created leverage. Every sentence chipped away at trust. Every sentence made explanations harder. Every sentence narrowed his options. When the recording ended, nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The damage was complete. Not because the recording destroyed David, because David's own words destroyed the version of himself he spent years presenting. The chairman finally broke the silence. His voice sounded exhausted. We need an executive session. Corporate language. Simple language. Yet everyone understood what it meant. The outcome had become unavoidable. David looked toward me. For the first time in 10 years, he looked old. Not physically, emotionally, like someone watching a carefully constructed world collapse. And for the first time since this began, I felt no anger. Only sadness. Because consequences were arriving exactly as they should. Not through revenge. Not through retaliation. Through truth. David lowered his eyes. And in that moment, I knew his downfall could no longer be stopped. The board's executive session lasted nearly 3 hours. I spent most of it alone on the rooftop terrace outside the building. The city stretched endlessly beneath gray clouds. Traffic crawled through the streets below. People hurried between offices. Meetings continued. Deals were negotiated. Lives moved forward. The world had a remarkable ability to continue regardless of individual disasters. For years, I found that unfair. Now I found it comforting. The glass door opened behind me. I didn't need to turn around. The footsteps were familiar. David. He stopped several feet away. Neither of us spoke immediately. For a long moment, we simply stood there overlooking the city. Mentor and student. Or at least we used to be. Finally, David broke the silence. I suppose you've won. The words sounded tired. Not bitter, just tired. I looked at the skyline. No. A faint laugh escaped him. That's not how it feels. I understood. From his perspective, perhaps it looked like victory, exposure, consequences, reputation damage, power shifting. Yet the emotion inside me felt nothing like victory. Winning implies satisfaction. I felt none, only loss. David leaned against the railing. When did you know? The question lingered between us. I considered it carefully, then answered honestly. I didn't. His eyebrows rose slightly. I continued. I suspected something was wrong. A pause. I just didn't know it was you. The honesty seemed to hit him harder than accusation would have. Because accusation creates opposition. Honesty creates reflection. David nodded slowly. The wind moved through the rooftop. Cold, steady, unforgiving, much like reality. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then David surprised me. I never hated you. I finally turned toward him. His eyes remained fixed on the city. Not on me. Not on the building. The city, as if searching for something he'd misplaced. Then why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Not angry, not demanding, simply curious. Because after everything that had happened, I genuinely wanted to understand. David exhaled slowly, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked vulnerable. I thought you were wasting it. Wasting what? Influence. The answer came immediately, as if he'd rehearsed it for months. Maybe years. David finally looked at me. You never wanted power. His voice carried genuine frustration. Not the frustration of an enemy. The frustration of someone who believed they knew better. You built things. He gestured toward the city, then stepped back. His expression tightened. You protected people who would have never protected you. The words landed harder than expected, because part of me knew they were true. David continued. You had opportunities. His voice grew quieter. Bigger opportunities. The realization arrived slowly, painfully, then all at once. This was never about money. Never entirely. It was about control, vision, belief. David genuinely thought he was right. That made everything worse. Because villains are easy to understand. People convinced they're helping are much harder. He shook his head. I thought if leadership changed, a bitter smile appeared. The company would become what it was supposed to be. There it was. Justification. The story he'd told himself. Not greed. Not malice. Necessity. History is filled with damage caused by people convinced they were acting for a greater purpose. David wasn't evil. He was wrong. And sometimes wrong people cause more destruction than malicious ones. Because they never recognize the moment they cross the line. The silence stretched. Then David laughed quietly. You know what's funny? I waited. I still think parts of my argument were correct. A sad smile touched my face. Probably. That surprised him. I continued. You weren't wrong about everything. His eyes narrowed. Then why are we standing here? The answer came instantly. Because being partly right doesn't give you the right to manipulate people. Silence. Deep silence. The kind nobody can argue with. Because both of us knew it was true. Eventually David nodded. Slowly. Painfully. Accepting something he should have accepted long ago. The conversation ended shortly after. No dramatic reconciliation. No emotional speeches. No cinematic closure. Just two people standing in reality. And reality was enough. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet. Not because nothing happened. Because I stopped chasing everything. For years my schedule had been filled with crises. Problems. Responsibilities. Urgent matters. Now I began removing things. Meetings I didn't need. Projects I no longer cared about. Relationships built entirely on obligation. The process felt uncomfortable, then liberating. People noticed. Some reacted poorly. Others understood. A few surprised me completely. One afternoon, Marcus appeared carrying coffee. No agenda. No emergency. No explanation. Just coffee. We sat in a park overlooking a small lake. For nearly 20 minutes, neither of us discussed the podcast, or Lena, or David. Instead, we talked about ordinary things. Movies, restaurants, travel plans, normal conversation, human conversation. Eventually, Marcus looked toward the water. I don't know if we're ever going back to how things were. The honesty felt refreshing, because it was true. Trust can recover, but it rarely returns unchanged. I nodded. We're not supposed to. He glanced toward me. I continued. That version already ended. Marcus stared at the lake, then laughed quietly. You're annoyingly reasonable. For the first time in a very long while, I laughed too. A real laugh. Not a defensive one. Not a polite one. A genuine laugh. The sound surprised both of us. Lena resigned before formal proceedings could begin. Officially, she cited personal reasons. Nobody believed that. Yet nobody cared enough to argue. By that point, public attention had moved elsewhere. Another controversy. Another scandal. Another story. The internet consumes people quickly, then forgets them even faster. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt nothing. Not because her actions didn't matter, because my life no longer revolved around them. That realization felt important. For months, perhaps years, I had unconsciously allowed conflict to define my direction. Every decision became a reaction. Every action became a response. Now I wanted something different. Not revenge. Not vindication. Direction. My phone rang one afternoon. Claire. I answered. How are you? She laughed. That's my question. Fair. We spoke for nearly an hour. About work. About trust. About starting over. About the strange experience of watching illusions collapse. Near the end of the conversation, she said something that stayed with me. When everything happened, I thought exposure would fix things. I waited. It doesn't. No. She sighed. It just reveals where the work begins. After the call ended, I sat quietly for a long time, thinking about those words. She was right. Truth isn't the destination. It's the starting point. Months later, I found myself teaching a small group of entrepreneurs. Not because I planned it, because someone asked, then someone else asked, then another. The sessions grew gradually. No cameras, no influencers, no podcasts, just people trying to build something meaningful. The work felt surprisingly fulfilling. Perhaps because nobody expected me to save them, only guide them. There was a difference, a crucial difference. One evening after a workshop, a young founder approached me, nervous, determined, reminding me of myself years ago. He hesitated before speaking, then asked, "What's the most important lesson you've learned?" A simple question, yet I stood there for several seconds, thinking, searching. The answer eventually arrived. Not from business, not from leadership, not from success, from everything that came afterward. I smiled, then said, "Pay attention to who only values you when you're useful." The young founder nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps he understood. Perhaps he didn't. Some lessons require experience. Mine certainly did. As I walked toward my car, a feeling settled quietly inside me. Not happiness. Not exactly. Something deeper. Something steadier. Peace. Peace begins when winning stops mattering. And for the first time in years, winning truly didn't matter anymore. Only what came next. Only the life still waiting to be lived. That night, as rain tapped softly against my apartment windows, an email arrived. The sender's name made me pause. Ethan. The subject line contained only 3 words. You should see. I opened it. Inside was a link. A new podcast episode. Not sensationalized. Not dramatic. Just a title. The Cost of Being Wrong. I stared at the screen, then slowly pressed play, and realized the final chapter of this story had not yet been written. Rain continued falling outside my apartment as Ethan's new episode began. There was no dramatic music, no audience, no flashy introduction, no sponsor segment, no performance, just Ethan sitting alone in a studio. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. Not because he looked different, because he looked honest. The camera remained fixed. The room remained quiet. Then he spoke. I was wrong. No build-up, No excuses. No careful framing. Just 4 words. Simple words. Heavy words. The kind most people spend entire lives avoiding. I watched silently. Ethan continued. This isn't an episode about Daniel. He paused. It's about me. That sentence alone told me how much had changed. For years, loyalty test had thrived on external targets. Other people's failures. Other people's mistakes. Other people's conflicts. Now Ethan was doing something entirely different. Looking inward. The episode wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. At times it was uncomfortable. At times he struggled to find words. But perhaps that was why it worked. Because honesty is rarely polished. He spoke about ambition, validation, audience pressure, the temptation to believe popularity equals wisdom, the danger of confusing attention with truth. And eventually he spoke about friendship. The audience never saw our private conversations. They didn't need to. What mattered wasn't the details. What mattered was recognition, accountability, ownership. By the time the episode ended, I felt strangely emotional. Not because everything had been repaired, because it hadn't. Some damage never fully disappears. What moved me was something simpler. Growth. Real growth. Rare growth. The kind that costs something. The kind that hurts. The kind most people avoid. I closed the laptop and sat quietly. The room felt peaceful. Not triumphant. Peaceful. There was a difference. A very important difference. 3 months later, I saw David again. Not at a board meeting. Not in a courtroom. Not in some dramatic confrontation. At a bookstore. Of all places. I was browsing a shelf near the business section when I noticed him. He looked older. Not dramatically. Just enough that life had become visible. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he smiled faintly. A tired smile. A human smile. I walked over. Neither of us seemed surprised. Perhaps some meetings are inevitable. Daniel. David. The exchange felt oddly normal. No hostility. No tension. Just 2 people standing among books. The silence lingered. Then David held up a book he had been examining. A terrible title. I looked at it. He was right. The title was terrible. Against all expectation, I laughed. And to my surprise, David laughed too. The sound echoed softly between shelves. Not because anything was funny. Because life is strange. Because after enough pain, people sometimes rediscover perspective. We walked to a nearby cafe. Not to revisit old arguments. Not to relive history. Simply to talk. For nearly 2 hours we discussed everything except the scandal. Books. Economics. Technology. Cities. Travel. Ordinary things. Eventually the conversation reached the past anyway. Not dramatically. Naturally. David stirred his coffee. Then spoke quietly. I kept asking myself where I crossed the line. I listened. He stared into the cup. The strange thing is... A sad smile appeared. I can identify 100 small decisions. I understood immediately. Because major failures rarely arrive all at once. They arrive disguised as small compromises. Tiny exceptions. Minor justifications. Little shortcuts. Each one feels reasonable. Until eventually you're standing somewhere you never intended to be. David looked at me. I wish I'd recognized it sooner. I believed him. And for the first time, I realized something important. Forgiveness isn't always a gift to another person. Sometimes it's permission to stop carrying the weight yourself. That didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending nothing happened. It simply meant releasing the need to relive it forever. When we parted ways, there was no grand reconciliation. No emotional embrace. No dramatic ending. Just mutual understanding. And somehow that felt enough. The entrepreneur program continued growing. Slowly. Steadily. Exactly the way meaningful things usually grow. New founders joined. Businesses launched. Partnerships formed. Failures happened. Successes happened. Life happened. I found myself enjoying the work more than anything I'd done in years. Not because it was easy, because it felt real. Nobody attended seeking entertainment. Nobody wanted scandal. Nobody cared about internet narratives. They wanted guidance, perspective, honesty. The simplicity felt refreshing. One afternoon, Claire joined as a guest speaker. She was excellent, confident now, grounded. far removed from the nervous woman who had appeared outside my apartment months earlier. After the session ended, we stood outside watching participants leave. She smiled. "They seem to trust you." I considered the statement, then shook my head. "No." Claire raised an eyebrow. "No. They trust themselves." A smile slowly appeared on her face. "That's better." Yes, it was. Because dependence isn't leadership. Growth is. For years I confused the two. I wouldn't make that mistake again. Marcus eventually rebuilt parts of his relationship with Ethan. Not perfectly, not completely, but honestly, which mattered more. One evening the three of us met on a rooftop. The same rooftop where we'd sat years earlier. The same rooftop from the recording. The same rooftop where three younger men once promised success wouldn't change them. The city lights stretched endlessly around us. For while nobody spoke, the memory was too obvious, too present. Finally Marcus laughed. "You know what's annoying?" Ethan groaned immediately. "Here we go." Marcus pointed toward the skyline. "We were actually happy back then." I smiled. Most people don't realize they're happy until later. Ethan nodded slowly. The statement settled over us. Quiet. True. A breeze moved across the rooftop. For a moment the years seemed to overlap, past and present standing side by side. Then Ethan spoke. I kept listening to that recording, the old one, the rooftop recording, the promise, the warning. Success makes people rewrite history. Marcus shook his head. Turns out we should have listened. Nobody argued, because there was nothing to argue. The city continued glowing beneath us. Alive, moving, changing, just like people, just like friendships, just like everything else. Nearly a year after the podcast incident, I received an invitation. A media conference, leadership panel, industry event. The kind of invitation I once accepted automatically. I almost declined, then changed my mind. Not because I wanted publicity, because I wanted closure. The auditorium was packed. Executives, creators, journalists, entrepreneurs. During the final session, audience members submitted questions. Most were predictable. Business questions, leadership questions, growth questions. Then one question appeared on the screen. A young attendee had submitted it anonymously. The moderator read it aloud. "What do you do when people betray your trust?" The room became quiet. Many people knew the history. Many didn't. Either way, the question landed heavily. I thought for a moment, then answered. "You stop trying to control what happens next." The audience listened. I continued. "You tell the truth." A pause. "You set boundaries." Another pause. "And then you allow people to live with the consequences of their choices." The room remained silent. Not uncomfortable. Thoughtful. I smiled slightly. The hardest part is accepting that consequences belong to them. The moderator nodded. The audience applauded. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. The response felt appropriate. Measured. Mature. Complete. That evening I walked alone through the city. No meetings waiting. No crisis demanding attention. No narrative requiring defense. Just a quiet street and a cool night breeze. My phone vibrated. A message from Marcus. A terrible photo of Ethan trying to cook. Followed immediately by Ethan demanding the photo be deleted. Then several increasingly ridiculous messages. I laughed aloud. A passerby glanced at me curiously. I didn't care. For a moment, I stood beneath the city lights, smiling at a screen. Not because everything had worked out perfectly. Because it hadn't. Lives don't become perfect after lessons are learned. Relationships don't become flawless after truth emerges. People remain complicated, messy, human. The difference was that I finally accepted it. The old voice note had changed everything. Not because it exposed a villain. Not because it won an argument. Not because it saved my reputation. It changed everything because it forced people to confront themselves. Including me. Especially me. I had spent years believing loyalty meant carrying everyone else's weight. Protecting everyone else's mistakes. Fixing everyone else's problems. I was wrong. Loyalty without boundaries eventually becomes self-abandonment. And self-abandonment helps no one. Not friends. Not family. Not colleagues. Not yourself. I stopped walking and looked out across the city. The future stretched ahead. Unknown. Uncertain. Open. For the first time in a very long while, that uncertainty felt exciting. Not frightening, exciting, because the story no longer belonged to the past. It belonged to what came next. And sometimes the most important truth is the simplest one. The people who leave your life teach you who they are. The people who stay teach you who you are. I slipped my phone into my pocket and continued walking. The city lights shimmered ahead. The night air felt clean. And without looking back, I stepped forward into the life waiting for me.